Okay. Good evening, everybody. I want to welcome you here to our retrospective of Ukraine for the year of 2023. How is everybody tonight?
Excellent.
Yeah.
Despite the absolutely terrible weather here, I'm doing well.
Yeah, I saw you guys got snow, and I'm like, we haven't. And uh, we got snow in the mountains.
Evanston Evanston got like freezing rain and sludge, but yeah, like New Lenox, all the places
Yeah.
that we used to frequent got a lot of snow.
So we're kind of gathered here tonight to talk about the whole year in Ukraine and kind of so how 2022 ended, I think, is a good place to start because that kind of set a weird tone, right?
Yeah.
You saw these successes in Kharkiv and Kherson, and the expectation was that was going to continue, right? And obviously that didn't happen.
There's something so in the Kharkiv counteroffensive and in the Kherson counteroffensive. One thing that I noticed was the amount of funerals of troops, like Ukrainian troops, going up, like significantly up. And I follow a pretty limited region. The area of Ukraine that I frequent is the northeastern part, more towards Belarus. And I think that those offensives were a lot more costly than we were led to believe. Even the Kharkiv offensive, as much of a breakthrough as it was, I think it was pretty taxing for the Ukrainians to actually implement it. And there was a lot of calls for the military leadership to continue on with it, to press their advantage, and that didn't end up happening. And it allowed Russian forces to dig in quite substantially in the south.
Yeah, I think there's two parts to that discussion. I think the first part of that discussion is what calls to advance in Kherson. I don't think the Kherson region is ever really an option at that time, right? Because like it wasn't that they drove the Russians back after decisive victory or anything similar than that. It was very
No.
much a case of Russia pulled back to consolidate their lines. I don't think like with the river there, with the Dnipro River there, and Russia pulling back in fairly good order, I don't think it was ever an option that they would be able to make that move, right?
Yeah.
The only counter to that, I would say, is that it's, to my thinking, fairly clear that the impetus to begin that withdrawal was not a voluntary one. The Ukrainians were conducting an offensive. It was making good progress. And I think the Russians, this is one of those rare occasions when, Hitler listens to the general staff sort of thing. I think somebody told Putin, hey, look, if we don't get our guys out of there, we're going to lose 100,000 troops.
Yeah, they took the option of avoiding slow cuts to death in that case.
Yeah.
That said, I'm not sure that like that kind of success that they were getting, like they were tearing bits and pieces out of that. Effectively, it was a salient at that point, one block at a time.
It was a very grinding offensive and very costly one as far as I could observe. The recent counteroffensive was a lot like Kherson, but with much less success.
We'll get to that because I think the first thing to talk about is kind of like winter, and there's two big items that happen in winter. The first is Bakhmut and the fighting around Bakhmut. And the second is Russia's attempt to try to freeze out Ukrainian cities from the air, which we are seeing a repeat of now.
Right.
That really drove, like, those two things drove themselves in tandem.
The one that gets me is Bakhmut for any half intelligent force would have been a try this for a week and then say, dude, this isn't working, find something else. But they kept that thing going for close to 6 months. And, the old expression of what is insanity, it's repeating the same thing again and again, hoping you'll get different result. That's
They
what
had
was
a lot
happening.
of expendable, um, expendable assets that they used in Bakhmut, and because it was primarily led by the Wagner group, they were able to, utilize their mobilized prisoners, their sort of shock troops that they would use, and the more elite forces would actually they'd use those sort of human miniature squad human waves to probe Ukrainian defensive lines, so that the more elite troops could actually engage them, and also they could use artillery. But no, I mean it was a very slow advance and very costly, and not, I mean, even by any stretch of the imagination, it wasn't successful.
Yeah, I
Well,
agree.
yeah, there's a lot to it, I think. The first is that Bakhmut is basically gone.
Yeah.
As a city, it's effectively over. Like, it's rubble. The second part of that is, like, while it was going on, like, it became a fairly easy, in a certain sense, to follow battle too, because we started talking about the same streets and, like, rubble complexes over and over the course of several weeks or months, that they'd just be fighting over it. And, like, it became it became a somewhat, like, Stalingrad-esque situation. Like, I think if you think about what's going to come out of this war, like, iconic stories, Bakhmut and those situations are going to be that kind of thing.
Oh,
where
for
you
sure.
find those kinds of representations in media a lot too. Like, there's very iconic stuff that came out of Stalingrad, like the factories and certain houses that were fought over and defended.
The I've heard, I don't know where I read it, it was a while back, but that the Russians lost more troops in Bakhmut than we did in the entire Guadalcanal campaign.
Yeah, it's possible.
Which would be something like around the order of 12,000.
Yes,
troops.
I mean,
that's not an insignificant amount of, like, force to be expending on a pretty. I mean, you could argue that the route there was strategic and valuable. I mean, the road.
Yeah.
Going beyond that, but I mean, as far as I know, they still haven't taken it. I mean,
they're still fighting there
pretty
today.
much.
Bakhmut is ongoing as a relative. It was ongoing throughout the summer as a counteroffensive, as an area that the Ukrainians are trying to take back. As far as I can see, there's pretty much daily fighting going on there.
I remember when I was leaving Ukraine before the war started, I was having a conversation with a woman who was from actually Crimea, and we were talking about, just the possibility of war happening. And she said, if this war happens, it's going to be a terrible war. I mean, not that, all wars are terrible, but, like, I couldn't imagine it being, the bloodbath that it is. I mean, it's almost like Iran, Iraq, 1980s style bloodbath.
I think
it's
there's a disconnect for people, because they kind of categorize Russia as similar to the United States in size, and therefore they assume capability. And what happens is, like, you watch America fighting wars, and for the most part, like, the dramatic parts are over very quickly, like Iraq 2003, Desert Storm, even Afghanistan. The part where we take over the place happens pretty quickly. We kick in the door, and that's when our problems begin.
Yeah.
So, by and large, the world has gotten used to watching large powers easily win. So no one was quite expecting this,
Yeah,
except for the people who've been sitting there since 2014, enduring this.
of
Yep.
course. I think you had stated it on a previous show that we had you on, Commander, that a lot of NATO's doctrine is predicated on air superiority.
Yep.
And that's something that Russia did not achieve at all in the beginning of their campaign. And they also, the thing that was, I mean, we're going back a little bit to talk about the whole, we're talking about 2023, but
We're going back to 2022 now.
yeah, but they really did not bomb the critical infrastructure. They didn't fight the war in the way that we would fight it, and I think that surprised a lot of people.
Yeah.
I don't think
if
though
I wanted
that
to categorize the Russian air campaign, at least at the opening at February 2022, and in particular their use of their paratroopers at the Hostomel airport, as arrogant as what it was. Like,
yeah,
there's an arrogance to it, and they were disabused of that notion, but the vet basically being destroyed outside of Kyiv. But by this flip side, they also figured out that they don't actually have to fly into Ukraine to shoot at Ukraine. So, get to Titan. You mentioned Russians destroying power infrastructure to freeze out Ukrainians. We know there are active agents in Russia. Will they make similar sabotage attempts there? Possibly. The Ukrainian special services have been on the ball really well. Also, we should bring up, speaking of the SBU, apparently Gonzalo Lira has died in Ukrainian custody, according to Twitter. We don't have any kind of confirmation on this yet, but if he has, I'd like to say that the fires of hell are burning a little brighter tonight. Good riddance to bad rubbish. Speaking of Russian agents,
that goes both ways though. Anytime you have a massive attack, like for example, what was it, September or August? I don't remember. I know I was with my girlfriend when it happened. But when they bombed the Chernihiv theater, in that area, there was a leak that they were having like sort of a drone, like a convention on unmanned aerial warfare. They advertised this, and someone informed Russian intelligence, and they sent a missile which hit the theater.
yes.
A theater that I spend a lot of time around.
There is a degree to which, if you're Ukrainians watching, we urge you to practice operational security.
Yeah,
people are watching.
For the most part, they don't need to be told that. They're really, I mean, there's a lot of.
Sure, but it's like American soldiers. If you don't tell them that it's your fault when something goes wrong, it's really the argument there. I saw that. Can you give me context? So Gonzalo Lira, best known for being Coach Red Pill, is an American. Well, journalist is not the right word. He's a provocateur. He worked for Russia Today, and his principal job was to spread propaganda to try to get Ukraine to surrender and to try to disabuse people of supporting Ukraine. For funsies, apparently, he decided to start giving out the location and information of foreign journalists working in Ukraine so that they could be targeted by Russian forces. He was asked to leave several times, decided against it, and several months ago was captured in the city of Kharkiv in a horrible rat hole of an apartment after he had been told many times to leave Ukraine. And this time, instead of telling him to leave, they took him into custody.
Ukraine, and I'm not saying, I mean, I know he's a journalist, he's working for a Russian,
well, he has he's at best a collaborator.
Yeah, Russia Today. Yeah, at best, but I will state on both sides, because I lived in Ukraine. I lived there more or less as an expat, but I like to think of myself because I have roots there, and also that I did my master's research there, was doing preparations for a PhD there, for a PhD project. I can say that there's a lot of expatriate trash that live in Ukraine in general.
Sure, but
And some of them are
not all of them are getting
not
up and
all of them
hosting a
give
show where they're
information
trying
to.
to undermine NATO
I'd say that
support.
that Gonzalo Liram is one of the only people that did it consciously, but a lot of these other people. The one only good thing I can say about this war is it got rid of a lot of those people. They really, I had no idea why a lot of those people even were in Ukraine, quite honestly. But yeah,
Yeah, so like kind of getting back to freezing Ukrainians out too. Uh, what Russia has been doing is they have a very clearly defined zone of control where Ukrainian air defense can't really operate. And they can fly their planes in that area and uh, target Ukrainian cities. Because what Russia did during the Cold War is they heavily invested in large bombers, big strategic bombers. The Tupolev company did a lot of them, for example. And the principal design behind these bombers was to build something that could fire a large number of cruise missiles quite far. It was kind of, on one hand, a strategic option for nuclear war, and a option for anti-carrier work because they were trying to figure out how to sink the American carriers. So what Ukraine did over the winter and is doing now is they would load up these bombers with missiles. They'd fly to a designated point, release the weapons, turn around, and go back. Then Ukraine air defense just has to deal with the cruise missiles instead of the platforms that launch them.
and that's a bigger problem now because of the issue of supply.
Yes.
And there's a dual purpose that this has, and I think actually now I think that they're going to be less targeting critical infrastructure and more focusing on degrading and attriting Ukraine's air defense.
Yeah. Well, so what it is
and
it's an expenditure versus what's coming in, and like they're dependent upon foreign aid to bring in new equipment, and that's because the United States Congress is dilly dallying, drying up. So what they're stuck with is they have to continue to defend against Russian missiles. They don't have a choice because the Russian missiles will kill people, and they need to try to stop them. But now they're basically using a limited resource, and Russia can outlast them and continue the barrage.
the fear that I have is that eventually it's going to have to become, they're going to have to start prioritizing, you know, and start basically, what's the word I'm looking for? Prioritizing where they use their air defense. And there might be actually points where they can't be using their for example, their medium range or long range air defense for this purpose. And these missiles are going to hit buildings, people are going to die. There's going to be more of sort of an emphasis on again on getting to shelter rather than I mean that's still there, that emphasis, but what I'm saying is like they're not going to be able to intercept them. They're not going to be able to expend all of it.
Well,
And the
yeah,
big concern that I have is that once Ukraine's air defense gets to a critically low point, if we're not able to get them sufficiently supplied, if Russia has air superiority there, they're going to turn a lot of cities into rubble. They're going to start
that's
using
exactly
the full
what will
might
happen.
of their air force.
Two things will happen in very short order. So call your Congress people. the first thing is that Russia will start leveling cities as best they're able beyond the reach of Ukrainian air defense. So they'll hit cities like Kharkiv and Kyiv and even Lviv if they can get away with it. The second is that this is a remediable problem. The Republican Congress has to get off its ass and do its job and help this nation defend itself. It's just that simple. And the longer it looks bad, the harder it will be to fix the problem.
Where I sit right now, my biggest fear outside of what I just mentioned, Ukraine is at the stage, and this is one reason too why I think, maximalist goals on Ukraine's side, even though they are morally right, and I stand by them, and by moral principle, they're unrealistic.
Well, let's talk about that because I'm not sure that's really a fair assessment, right? Because Ukraine's maximalist goals only exist because Russia's maximalist goals exist at the end of the day. Like, we're going to take back all our territory. So far, Russia has not indicated, and they have continued to proclaim their maximalist goals of taking over the whole country. So it doesn't really make sense. It doesn't. There's no negotiation.
The military, and that is another issue. But
there's no negotiation to happen here.
Yeah, if Russia reduces its maximalist goals, I would hope that Ukraine would start, like, there could be some sort of negotiations, because this isn't neither one. I mean, Russia's actually going into this year is more at pace, closer to reaching that goal. They're not going to reach it this year at all. I don't think that they'll reach it at all. But they are the one with the advantage going into 2024, and that's very, very scary. What worries me is, Ukraine's position for negotiation gets weaker the longer this drags out.
Are you?
Yeah, they
ahead.
have less resources to draw upon to continue a protracted war. And I think that's what we're seeing, is that they're starting to reach that level. And it's not just hardware, it's not just manpower, it's also national morale. These guys have been basically living under constant bombardment by the Russians. And you can see it starting to have a morale impact.
Yeah, there's a definite shift I've seen. There's a definite shift I've seen from a lot of the prominent public-facing Ukrainian accounts. They're starting to get this harder edge and much more aggressive propaganda edge to it. Like, and it's not one of those things I generally comment on, because, like, they're in the middle. They've been doing this since 2014. It's been a long time for them that they've been fighting, and, like, they've been anything that the Ukrainian people have needed to prove by valor, they've done 1,000 times over.
Of course.
And it's kind of at the point where, again, I feel the exact same way I did when the principal Russian invasion started in 2022. Is we could probably wrap this thing up in a year if we went in and helped the Ukrainians. Like, it exists as an option. It's not beyond the pale. We know they're not going to escalate into a nuclear weapon if we just drive them out of Ukraine. They're not going to do it. It's not worth it.
Oh, no. I'm not sure of that.
I
don't know how you feel, Commander.
I think it would be similar to what occurred with, say,
Cuban?
Well, not Cubans, but I was thinking the Korean War and also to some extent the Vietnam War, where the superpowers kind of accepted that you could fight this proxy war in somebody else's territory as long as you didn't cross into theirs.
Yes, that's
as
really...
long as Soviet ships bringing munitions to Haiphong were not shot up by the American Sixth Fleet, or Seventh Fleet, which is sitting there literally watching them come in, but not doing anything, then they were willing to allow that to happen. So I think if you looked at it from a limited intervention standpoint, that might be something feasible, but that's not really the question about that. The real question about that is whether the national will here in the U.S. can build consensus to make such a thing feasible. And I don't think we can.
No, not at all.
Not this year for sure.
Yeah. Other things on our minds.
Yes. Particularly, but that's ultimately the problem is this was a solvable problem, I think. And the opportunity to solve it is past.
Yeah, that's long past.
Oh yeah.
I think
the incrementalist approach has been as flawed and morally bankrupt as appeasement was in the late 30s. And for some reason, we decided that was the way to go. It's, either give them everything they need now to bring it to a conclusion, or just say, sorry, bub, you're on your own. Instead, we've dragged this on, prolonged the suffering, and it's unconscionable in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. That's a really good point that you make, because, I mean, the weapons that, by the time they're getting, the more sophisticated heavy weaponry, Russia's already dug in. The mobile phase, where they could have used,
where there'd have been high effectiveness on things like attack.
Like in the Kharkiv offensive, if they would have had some of the equipment that they had now and the training to use them. Yeah. The Bradleys would have been great.
Yeah. Ukraine in mid-22 getting access to HIMARS, Bradleys, Leopards, maybe F-16s being on the back burner there while they're working up all the 155 various systems that the U.S. and NATO gave them. All of that being available almost a full year before it really started to become available. Think of how that could have changed things.
Oh, I think it would have made a significant impact.
Yeah.
I mean,
but that ship has sailed and run aground.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
So, which begs the question, like, there's no. I don't know what you would send to change the status quo, I guess, is my problem.
I don't think that there's anything that you could send. I mean, Ukraine could conceivably, if you were to send them, say, like F-35s, which no one's going to do. F-16s are not a solution.
But you're looking at a 2-year training cycle to bring those to bear.
Oh, yeah.
At this point, the only thing that could be sent that would change the situation is NATO forces.
Yeah.
And as we just mentioned, that ain't going to happen.
Yeah. And by NATO, I think like maybe the UK and the United States. I'm not sure some of the other forces are up to that task.
I think
there's twofold
the Poles
problems.
and the Germans, and certainly the Swedes, could probably pull it off.
Yeah, there's twofold problem, I think. The first problem is the minefields. Now, they have the technology exists to clear the minefields. However, the minefields are also covered by 5,000 artillery pieces per square inch. So you also have to be able to suppress their artillery and disperse it. So it's a twofold problem. So like an F-16 in and of itself can help get you to a place where you might be able to suppress the artillery, but then you still need the mine clearers. You still need the forces to push through the fields after they're done. Like it's a massive problem. Like there's not a clever flank that the Ukrainians can find and exploit. anymore. That has sailed. That was this year. That was this winter. And that's what they discovered over the summer in the counteroffensive. Is there's no space. There's no little gap they can get in.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that the opportunity got lost last winter because that gave the Russians, due to the winter pause, gave them time to dig in, sow the minefields, prepare all of that stuff. And yeah, they have had to delve into their second line equipment. Yeah, they're fielding troops whose training is about that of your average Boy Scout. But regardless, they can hold ground. So trying to make progress through that, we hoped, but yeah, it didn't happen.
Yeah, it's not going. There's not an easy any kind of like something has to give on Russia's side now, for that to happen. Like another Wagner insurrection style disaster has to happen.
Yeah, but the other thing. Go ahead.
Those two things, I think, were a lot of people had like hope when both when the Wagner insurrection happened, and then also immediately after Prigozhin was assassinated. There was hope that maybe it would, create some schism and fraction that would,
No, but Russian
Yeah.
high-ranking officers started disappearing like crazy around that time.
They did, yeah.
So Putin probably there probably was a schism, but Putin probably tamped it down very quickly.
I know, yeah.
He's like,
Yeah.
no, in
Well,
Soviet,
his purges, and Putin definitely has his.
it's in Soviet Russia, Putin throws window through you.
Yeah.
Guys.
See, give my dog a grease.
So yeah, that's definitely like so the Wagner insurrection was kind of a high drama moment. What was gonna happen, and like it was hard to tell because it was so crazy to attempt in the first place. Like then they started doing it, and I'm like, wait, what?
Yeah. The other thing that I've noticed is interviews, man in the street interviews in Russia. You're now starting to see people say things critical of the special military operation and the glorious leader.
That's the thing about Russia is it's not a Stalinist or even like, a post-Stalinist Soviet level of control over the citizenry.
Yeah.
Like they're not afraid to say what they feel, and that they don't. I mean, there are consequences, of course, to certain things, but they're not being widely pursued, because if they were, basically what Putin has done is he's created a greater standard of living for I mean, granted, it's not huge middle class, but it's there.
They select
And
middle class.
as soon as that is disrupted, he knows that's an issue for him. Control is an issue for him in that regard. And I know people were, there's always this like speculation, by some experts about Putin that when this was beginning, that he was going to clamp down and it was going to become more like a authoritarian, quasi-Stalinist style state, and that's just not the case. I do think, however, and this is different from a lot of my friends in Ukraine and my colleagues, I think if he were to be gone, the situation actually could change very quick. And I use the example of Stalin, how things quickly changed. I mean, not extremely quickly, but they changed immediately. And I think that one man, people say, okay, it's a systematic issue. It's a issue, of the Russian mindset, their sort of chauvinistic and colonialist mindset. But,
keep going.
things can change very rapidly as soon as, someone who commands that amount of power and that authority is gone. And some people start coming to their senses and realize, okay, we're not making money off this anymore. We're not benefiting from this. This is stupid. And I mean, that's how I could see this conflict, potentially ending for the better, is if something were to happen to Putin. And I think that that's kind of one of the best and most unrealistic things we can hope for. But yeah, I do think that it would be. I don't think Russia would reform necessarily. You're not going to see you know, a burgeoning Western style democracy. But I think that him out of the picture could actually change the situation. That's my theory. I mean,
Yeah, I don't think you're going to get any kind of big change in the Russian psyche. They're all going to be obedient little tools to an authoritarian master.
yeah,
It's how the authoritarian master is accountable to the hierarchy. And right now, the hierarchy is pretty much entirely that little crew of former KGB, FSB people that
yeah,
Putin has installed in all the key positions.
yeah, yeah. But
But there's definitely the casualties are having an impact. The
yeah,
shortages, the collapsing economy are having
yeah,
their impacts. So the will to continue the fight is eroding, but I don't think we can expect to see in Russia what you would expect to see in a Western democracy where the people would vote, the pro-war party out and the end the war party in. That's not going to happen. But if you get that sudden change, like you were just alluding to, that's when that pressure might be able to influence things in a more positive direction.
absolutely. I also don't think, like I agree with you. You can definitely see the fractures forming. Um, I don't think we know how deep they are within Russian society yet, or in terms of how badly this has affected their economy. But I think that it's sort of a long road. I think it's the longer this drags on, the more you're going to start to see that. And
Yeah.
hopefully, it comes sooner rather than later.
Yeah, one of the things I find interesting is that early on there were criticisms being voiced in these interviews, but it was typically by relatively young people, the ones who had weird hairdos or something, the fringe people. Now you're starting to see obvious pensioners having critical comments to make. And that to me is illuminating, because when the babushkas turn against you, you're screwed in Russia.
That's true. Yeah, that's very, very true. That's his main support base, is that old, sort of boomer.
The people who look back on the Soviet days and say, "Oh, those were the good old days."
You have a not so insignificant portion of that population in Ukraine too, believe it or not.
Oh yeah, you have them in all the Eastern European countries as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I found another survivor of the German occupation, and it was a woman from the town that was my case study for my MA thesis, and I hadn't interviewed her, so I had one of my friends interview this woman. She just turned 90, I think, or maybe 88. So she was very, very young during the German occupation. I think like 3 years old, 4. But she was able to give a lot of, secondary evidence, from, the stories that she heard from her parents, little bits of memories that she had here and there. But what's very interesting is, I one of my questions was, it got to something about, you know, the Stalinist era, and you know, she said we could use someone like him now. And she's not a pro-Russian person. She's definitely on the side of Ukraine. And she was like saying, you know, and my friend who was interviewing her, well, what about all the crimes that Stalin committed, and especially in Ukraine? And she's just like, well, what about the crimes that the current people are committing? A lot that sort of mindset is common. It's
Yeah.
astoundingly common among that generation. And these are people whose parents in, you know, 1932, 33, even, you know, prior to that with the dekulakization, suffered immensely. Like a lot of these people, even if they were, you know, she was actually a little bit different because her family, her father was a party member, was a career Red Army soldier, went through the whole war, actually miraculously survived. But I mean, yeah, even among some of the people who went through that, there's this reverence towards Stalin of all people, and it's one might miss that actually if they don't truly, you know, like visit Ukraine or actually talk to some of these people.
Sure.
But yeah, I'm not. I've given up hope that, you know, without Putin being gone, however that may happen, I've given up hope that people are gonna just, you know, be dissatisfied and get rid of him because of this.
Yeah.
I just don't think it's
He's
going to
have
happen.
to die of natural causes, or somebody in the inner circle is going to have to say,
Yeah.
okay, we're done. And that, I think, will be the deciding factor, because he can't negotiate. He has to get a win from the scenario. And right now, he doesn't see that he's getting a win.
Yeah. What I'm surprised, I mean, undoubtedly, Putin's probably one of the most well protected, if not the most well protected world leaders. Perhaps maybe rivaled maybe by the president of the United States, although of course Kennedy did not have that protection. I just had to throw that out. But
It was like a low blow, Jesus.
But he's probably one of the most he's one of the most well protected leaders in the world. Like, because I'm kind of surprised that Ukraine hasn't tried to neutralize, like their intelligence networks haven't tried to neutralize him.
I suspect in this particular case that Ukraine doesn't think that's going to buy them what they need. Putin assassinated by Ukraine gives the next Russian leader a cause that the country will rally behind.
Yeah.
I
don't know.
Putin, who falls dead of natural causes, clearly falls dead of natural causes, might be an issue for Russia that forces them to withdraw from Ukraine. But if Ukraine kills Putin, he becomes a martyr for this entire thing.
Always remember that falling out of windows is natural cause.
You know, I think that Russia might have that same thought in regards to Zelensky. Because, I mean, there was at the beginning attempts to get rid of him, but, I mean...
Fairly recently, in fact.
Yeah,
it's an ongoing process.
Okay.
Well. The ultimate thing I think to bear in mind is that Russia's not nearly as capable as they were assumed to be at certain things.
Yeah, their intelligence and special, you know, their intelligence, yeah,
like
for sure.
If you listen very carefully,
absolute sham.
If you listen very carefully outside the Lubomkia at night, you can hear the Benny Hill theme playing.
You know, it's kind of something that I tell people now. It's the FSB was able to convince people that they were really, really good intelligence agents. But in reality,
Well,
I mean,
their efficacy prior to 2014 was in turning people who were already corrupt against their own governments. So they were very successful in France with like Marine Le Pen, or Hungary with Viktor Orban, etc., etc., etc. Like they're very successful at that, because first of all, like you have a lot of corrupt right wingers for some reason who are willing to take Russian money, as long as they don't directly see what's happening. So like there are a certain subsection of American politicians who probably should be removed because they've been compromised, whether they know it or not, and some of them definitely know it. Rand Paul,
you
cough
said
cough.
Hungary and France. I was going to say, what about Tennessee? Mitch McConnell was certainly.
Mitch McConnell probably is aware that he sold his soul to Russia. Rand Paul is probably aware. Marjorie Taylor Greene is probably not. She's
what
one of
about,
those
like Tulsi Gabbard or
useful idiot categories, or Tulsi Gabbard. That could go either way.
Colonel Douglas McGregor.
Colonel Douglas McGregor is definitely doing it on purpose. So is Scott Ritter.
Yeah.
I don't understand. Like, I mean, I don't know. I think that these are people, you have a lot of people that they don't really think of these conflicts, in terms, they think of them in terms of like, power plays, in how a person very distant from it would. They don't really understand, the amount of human suffering that goes on with it, and they don't really have a stake in it. So they're able to kind of say things like this, and it goes
Or
both
they don't
ways.
care.
There's a lot of Ukraine cheerleaders. Like, I hate NATO for that reason. I don't like cheerleading wars. I mean, obviously, I want Ukraine to come up on top of this and mainly to survive, but I never wanted this. I wanted it, if there's a way diplomatically to end it at this point, I would pursue that in a feasible way that, would ensure Ukraine's security, which, I mean, obviously that doesn't exist at the moment, but if it did, I would, be the first person advocating for that. But a lot of people, like a lot of the experts, a lot of these think tanks, they don't realize. I mean, I'm sure that they kind of do, but they don't. A lot of them really don't have very close ties with Ukraine or close ties with Russia. For that matter. So someone like Colonel Douglas McGregor can spout off, okay, so Russia's just reacting the way we would, if. Just imagine if Russia was supplying Mexico with, however much. Like that's how these people think, and it's not a very mature, or like, I think, moral way of thinking about conflict and suffering.
So yeah.
One thing you can, when I started thinking of it in these terms, it started to make sense to me.
Yeah.
We're dealing with a modern wars of religion kind of situation. And I don't mean Christianity against Islam.
Yeah.
And the religion in the United States among a certain group, they may claim to be Christian, they're not. They worship money. Money is God to them.
Yeah.
And so if you get somebody from the Kremlin or somebody from the Forbidden City or whatever offering these bastards money, come to Jesus moment. Boom.
Yeah.
And I think that's really what's making all this happen in those circles.
Yeah. And like
it used to be ideology or being blackmailed. Now it's all about how can I profit off of this?
Yeah.
Wouldn't you say that would go both ways though too? For certain people who obviously I don't think a person like Lindsey Graham truly gives a crap about the Ukrainian people. I think that he can, he sees this war as an opportunity to enrich himself politically, because obviously, among the Republicans, there's like, the neocon factions that are very, very, there's never a war that they don't want to cheer on. I think that this goes both ways.
Sure, but at a certain point, I stopped caring about some parts of that, right? If Lindsey Graham wants to give me the money to keep Ukraine fighting, let's do it. Who cares what his motives are? And that's kind of like I think that's a separate topic, but an important one. Because like I'm gonna say this thing now, and let's see if we can get canceled for it. Sometimes politicians lie, and that's okay, because they're lying on the side of the angels instead of on the side of themselves. So like whether or not Lindsey Graham has a genuine love of Ukraine, I don't care. If it gets me what I want. And like that's
there's a fine line between getting what you want and keeping a conflict going when it is unrealistic to continue it. And I'm not saying that Ukraine's at that point. I am not, advocating that. But there's a fine line between that and fighting, cheering them on to fight to their last man.
No, but but there's a big difference though between like what Lindsey Graham is willing to enrich himself and like why Biden is letting this continue, because like he's got something wrong happening here, because it's not in his political interest for this to still be going on if he could have ended it.
Yeah.
Which I think is important to note is that it hasn't it's not in Biden's interest to fight to the last Ukrainian. It was in Biden's interest to end this last winter, so that it's not an election issue, particularly now with Israel being what's the word I'm looking for? Frisky. Frisky's the word.
Yeah.
Like now he has to control people on Israel. He has to control people on Ukraine. He has to send a message to a bunch of people who are having a much harder time affording food prices.
And he has to conserve ammunition to this current campaign.
And
in Yemen.
And Trump doesn't even Trump has to do none of these things because he's just a wrecking ball, like a horrible person that will break everything. But for some reason, people still want to vote for him. It makes very little sense for Biden to bear that out. So it
does, but you also got to consider that not everybody is thinking with that impetus, and there's also in regard. I don't want to get into Biden. I don't want to get into. That's a whole separate discussion. Maybe you and I could have an episode. Maybe. But, I think that he has some personal, to say the least, some personal involvement in this. He was, even from the beginning. And 2014, I'm going to say it here, there's a lot more than meets the eye to that. And I have, colleagues who can tell you that, who have written about it. That was not... I mean, there's an aspect. It's multi.
You're talking about
there's different factors going on.
Yeah.
No, I'm not talking about. I'm going back. Yeah, well, with Burisma, but I'm now going back. Even getting away from Biden, but going towards the Euromaidan and that revolution. There's a lot more going into that than meets the eye. And I mean. It's almost a matter of fact at this point, but it's not something that's well publicized, and it's something that's conveniently overlooked. It's not popular. I don't like saying it, especially because I run the risk of running afoul of my
let me stop you right there.
Yeah.
Are you attempting to suggest that there was some kind of United States effort to get the puppet government of Ukraine, Russian puppet government of Ukraine, to violate its own constitution in order to piss off its people so much that they would demand the removal of that government and the replacement of a friendly European government instead?
I mean, I wish I didn't.
Do you understand how many things, unlikely things, have to happen for that to be true?
This isn't. Look, we're going to have a whole discussion on this, and I actually have to do. I've kind of intentionally avoided getting into these discussions because it's such a contentious topic within Ukrainian studies and with among colleagues. But there are some people that I do trust who are writing on it.
Who are saying that this was somehow a manufactured event?
No, not completely. But there are aspects of it that were certainly manipulated, and certainly, like, for example, I don't want to. Can we not get into it, please?
Okay,
I'm not comfortable with it right now.
Yeah,
but we can. It's you're, and also you're simplifying it. Me and you will talk about it separately. I don't feel comfortable with this discussion.
Yeah, but I want
really
to put aside any indication that it's the common tanky conspiracy theory is what we're aiming at.
No, it's not the tanky conspiracy theory.
So yes,
but there's always there is some truth to it. Some truth. And let's leave it there. And
that's not a good place to leave that. Oh, Jesus.
Let's leave it there, and we'll revisit it sometime.
Okay. Now I know what we're doing next week.
Not that so. Actually, we can. Yeah.
Oh, we can't really leave that one sitting long.
Yeah.
It's something that will definitely need research before you start getting into it.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to see some stuff.
Yeah.
I'll send you Dr. Rich's stuff.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to see some stuff because.
Yeah, I can send you Ivan Kachanovsky, who, I mean, there's some aspects, that are, not with his research so much, but it's his personality that is problematic to people. He rubs people the wrong way. He's, but I think that he actually, to a large degree, is quite objective. But yeah. And by the way, this isn't, now it's completely not on people's minds in Ukraine because they're fighting for survival. But this was not among, a lot of people in Ukraine. This whole, I don't want to go into the tanky conspiracy theory, but they knew that there was more to it than, a civic revolution. So yeah, let's leave it there. We'll discuss this some other time. Me and you can actually start reading a little bit more. I've read a little bit. It's something, I want to say that the whole thing depresses me so much that I try to avoid it.
Well, if you want to stop talking about it, let's stop talking about it because we either need to answer it. We either need to be prepared to answer it now while we're talking about it live, or we don't talk about it.
We won't. Not right now. Anyway.
Yeah.
We've been at this for a while, and what I would like to ask is, where do you see things going in 2024?
How about you start, Hetman? Because my answer is not happy, so maybe you can find a happy answer.
Mine's not, I don't have a happy one either. I share the opinion of a lot of the analysts I follow, like Michael Kaufman, that this is going to be a disadvantageous year for Ukraine. It's going to be one where Russia enjoys fire superiority. It's going to be one hard winter for Ukraine. I don't think that there's going to be any breakthrough Russian offensives. But I think it's going to be a very difficult year for Ukraine, for both civilians and military alike.
And there was a particularly disturbing set of revelations from about a week ago, where Russia is firing North Korean-made ballistic missiles at Ukrainian supply depots now. The initiative is gone for Ukraine. Any initiative they had over the summer offensive is gone. They have to be able to weather. They're going to have to take this year, and they have to be able to weather these attacks. And what's going to have to happen is they can't have Bakhmuts. They can't do Bakhmuts anymore. They have to start.
No.
They have to start giving ground to take advantageous positions. They have to start pulling the Russians in so they can try to beat them. And I don't think they're
And
willing to do that.
yeah, and that's the problem. There's actually a systemic problem too with the Ukrainian armed forces. There are still a lot of old school officers within the Ukrainian army that pursue those type of problematic tactics. So yeah, I would agree with you, Daedalus. I don't think it's I don't think this year is going to bode well.
Yeah. So yeah, like overall, they're still fighting around Avika. That's pretty heavy. That I've seen in the last few days. They're still fighting around Bakhmut. But like, what is going to happen is Russia's just going to pound the crap out of them this year. I don't think Ukraine has announced some recruiting troubles.
Their big problem is that much of the military they need to do a mobilization. It's not a popular thing, and a large portion of the military-age male population has left abroad. And I was witness firsthand to this in my last job. So yeah, they have some not insignificant hurdles to raise manpower. They are starting to even, and I think it's a little bit. This aspect is being a little bit sensationalized, but they are starting to mobilize more women into the armed forces. But it's not like that they're forming. It's not like World War I where they're forming all women. It's like the Imperial Russian Army where they're forming all women units.
We talked rather extensively about women in combat roles. Me and Fairy Queen did on Monday. You can find it in the past live shows. Good talk. That's not nearly as problematic as people might try to portray it as. That's mostly just sexism coming out. There has been no significant information to suggest that women are not as capable as men at fighting.
And it's not even that, but I don't even think that there's actually like a heightened effort by the Ukrainian vojenkomat to mobilize women. Like I don't think that they're doing that.
Yeah. There is, to borrow a Hearts of Iron term, I don't think Ukraine is scraping the barrel quite yet.
No.
The problem, I think, is just they're not prepared. There's no way they could be prepared for a long war, and Russia knows this. Russia, I think, thinks that they just have to outlast Ukraine. Eventually, they'll collapse, and they can take over the country. Yep. That's really what Russia thinks. And I think that's what they're going to try to do, is try to bring about that collapse.
Yeah, I think they thought they could blitz the place at first. That didn't work. Then they thought grinding attritional offensives would work. That's what they tried doing at like Bakhmut and Avdiivka and such. And that didn't work. So I think the next year is just going to be stay where we are and, continue pushing where we can, but rely mostly on bombardment, terror tactics.
Yes. Russia, they're getting new missiles from North Korea and Iran, new drones, new equipment.
I never, have you ever, both of you ever thought that Russia would be using North Korean and Iranian missiles? I grew up reading about all the various Scud variants. And...
Oh yeah, I envision that every day of the week.
I think about it just as often as I think about the Roman Empire.
Though. Yeah, it's very ironic because they're the big supplier of that technology, and now they're,
Well, the other set of good news is that Somehow, without a navy and without ships or significant assets, the Ukrainian military and their intelligence units have managed to inflict a substantial. Well, they basically kicked the Black Sea Fleet's ass. They are
Yeah.
fully retreated back to actual Russian territory.
Navy managed to defeat the strongest navy in the Black Sea rather handily.
Yes. They've basically become that navy with drones. No, Road Squatch. Trump makes nothing better. Trump will make nothing better. He's probably a substantial portion of why this is a problem in the first place. Trump will make nothing better for anyone, anywhere, ever. Voting for Trump is like a chicken voting for Colonel Sanders. It doesn't matter who you are. Nothing better. That is the official position of me. If you don't like it, watch another show.
Yeah. So
Anyway,
I was going to say, I kind of agree with you both on the way things are likely to go this year with the Ukrainians. But I don't put it outside the realm of possibility that the Russians do something totally stupid and leave themselves open.
I think you're right too. I think
Maybe.
you're absolutely right.
There's not a lot of stupid that removes a minefield.
Well, they don't have minefields over a lot of the front, to at least not to the density that they do in that area south of Zaporizhzhia.
The central and the area in the Donbass, definitely much thicker than the area around the Dnipro River, but that's because the Dnipro River is there.
Yeah, if the Ukrainians can figure out a way to get substantial forces across that river, that does open up a whole new area where they could conduct operations.
They have
the terrain.
Yeah.
They have to do
the
it.
terrain there is
quickly.
Great. I'm sorry.
It's not a thing they can slowly build up. They have to do it and then do it quickly, or they'll have the same problem happen again.
Exactly.
I think that they can do it with, maybe light infantry.
To start, sure, but eventually they're going to have to exploit things, and
you've got to build a bridge and you got to get armored forces across. Because if you actually look at the ground on the opposite side from Kherson, it's low and then rises into low hills, kind of a plateauish sort of affair. And the Russians would be holding that high ground and be able to see everything going on down in that valley. So you need to have something that can get across that valley very quickly and hit the forces on the high ground. And light infantry ain't going to cut it for that.
Yeah, they have to do it fast. It can't be a little thing. They can't build up over time. It has to be very well planned and very well done. And I'll be perfectly frank. Outside of that one surprise out of Kharkiv, Ukraine has telegraphed everything that they're going to do. They can't do that here.
The Kharkiv thing, so much as it was an opportunity that presented itself.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I guess I have some concerns about staff competency to be able to do that effectively.
I also think too, where are they going to have a place on the front line where they have that much of a manpower advantage again?
You can do things to generate manpower advantage, like hit.
Well, not just manpower, but I mean, also, they didn't just have a manpower advantage, but also, advantage in equipment and everything else.
Yeah,
some sort of thing resembling air superiority over that sector. that kind
Yeah.
of stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Anyway.
I'm not saying I think it's going to happen. I'm just saying I don't think we can entirely discount the fact
I
that
agree. Yeah.
there may be an opportunity that presents itself akin to what happened with Kharkiv that the Ukrainians are able to exploit. Of course, the flip side of that argument is also true. It could entirely be possible the Ukrainians commit some blunder that hands some competent Russian commander at that sector of the front an opportunity to do something.
There's a competent Russian commander. Quick, get a window.
Yeah, exactly. Here, smoke some cigarettes next to these jerry cans. I'll be back in an hour.
Anyway, gentlemen.
Yeah, we are coming up to an hour, and we're actually over an hour. So I want to thank everybody for showing up tonight. I want to thank you both for being here tonight.
Mhm.
I think this was a good talk. We will. I haven't actually really planned the rest of the month yet. So I
want to do something on the current operations in the Gulf of Aden.
Yay! Sorry, I'm not enthused with the discussion happening around that. People, the Houthi are not freedom fighters. They're not even helping Gaza. They're just jackasses with missiles.
Yeah.
Come on, like.
Missiles with that.
They're not even. I'm not enthused with our reaction. Like, we could have just stuck to Aegis destroyers in the Gulf and shot down missiles for 2 months, and eventually they would have got bored and decided to do something else. They're just kids.
Yeah.
Just they're gonna get bored. Just Jesus. All right. Anyway, I want to thank everybody for showing up.
Take care, everyone.
Have a good night.
Take care.
All right.